The first time my daughter decided where I would spend the rest of my life, she didn't even bother asking if I wanted dessert. She smiled across the Thanksgiving table, lifted her wine glass, and said, "Mom, we found the perfect retirement community for you." Everyone laughed softly, as if she had announced a vacation. I remember setting my fork beside my plate instead of answering. Sometimes silence tells you more than an argument ever could. "I already scheduled a tour," my daughter Elena continued. "It's beautiful. You'll have people your own age, activities, medical staff, 24/7. And honestly, maintaining that old house isn't safe anymore." She spoke with the confidence of someone who believed the decision had already been made. My son-in-law, Daniel, nodded. "It'll also make things easier when the house sells." That sentence was the only honest one spoken that evening. The room suddenly felt smaller. The turkey cooled on the table while no one looked at me. Instead, they looked at the house they imagined they already owned. My name is Ruth Hernandez. I'm 64 years old, and until 18 months ago, I spent nearly 4 decades as the chief administrator of Riverside Memorial Hospital in Marietta, Ohio. Hospitals teach you something most people never learn. There is a difference between a difficult situation and an actual emergency. Families confuse those two every day. An emergency requires immediate action. A difficult situation merely requires patience. So while my daughter kept talking about brochures and waiting lists, I watched everyone's faces the same way I'd watch surgeons before complicated operations. The nervous tapping, the rehearsed smiles, the quick glance toward the person truly making the decisions. Daniel wasn't looking at me. He was looking at Elena. She wasn't looking at me either. She was staring through the dining room window toward my backyard, toward the hill beyond it, toward land that had suddenly become much more interesting than my health. "You'll love it there," she said, "and once the property sells, we'll help manage everything." Help. That word has ruined more families than money ever has. I took a sip of water. No. The room froze. Elena blinked. "I'm sorry?" I said no. Daniel laughed first, not because it was funny, because he thought I was negotiating. "Come on, Ruth," he said gently. "We're just trying to do what's best." I had heard those exact words hundreds of times in hospital board meetings, usually 5 minutes before someone tried to take something that belonged to someone else. "I appreciate your concern," I replied, "but I'm staying exactly where I am." Elena leaned forward. "You don't understand." "No," I answered quietly. "I understand perfectly." Nobody spoke for several seconds. Then my granddaughter asked if anyone wanted more mashed potatoes. Children have an extraordinary instinct for recognizing disasters adults pretend not to see. The conversation limped awkwardly toward football, Christmas plans, and the weather. But dinner was already over. Only the plates remained. When everyone finally left, Elena hugged me longer than usual. "I'll call tomorrow," she whispered. "I know." She kissed my cheek. Neither of us mentioned the house again. Not that night. After their cars disappeared down Maple Street, I locked the front door, walked into my late husband's study, and opened the small oak cabinet where I kept the documents I hadn't touched in nearly 9 years. Most people would have seen nothing special. Insurance papers, hospital retirement records, old photographs, one sealed envelope, one signature, and one decision I'd made almost a decade earlier that nobody, not even my daughter, had ever known about. The phone began ringing before I'd even finished reading the first page. I looked at the caller ID. Elena. I let it ring. Elena called 12 times before midnight. She left 3 voice messages. The first sounded worried. The second sounded impatient. The third sounded like someone trying very hard to sound kind while rehearsing an argument. I listened to none of them. Instead, I made coffee, carried it into Robert's study, and sat in the chair he had occupied every morning for 28 years. The leather had softened where his shoulders used to rest. Some habits survive grief better than people do. Robert had been gone 9 years. Pancreatic cancer. 93 days from diagnosis to funeral. Hospitals had taught me how diseases worked. My husband taught me how helpless knowledge could be. After he died, I buried myself in work. Running a regional hospital with nearly 700 employees left little time to think about empty rooms or untouched closets. It also taught me another lesson. Every crisis leaves paperwork behind. Every decision creates a trail. And the people who ignore documents usually regret it. The sealed envelope resting on my desk wasn't important because of what it contained. It mattered because everyone had forgotten it existed, even me. Until Thanksgiving dinner. The next morning, Elena appeared without calling. She walked through my front gate carrying 2 cups of coffee from my favorite cafe, smiling as though the night before had been nothing more than a misunderstanding. "I brought you usual." "Thank you." She set the coffee on the kitchen counter and wrapped her arms around me. "I barely slept." "I slept fine." She sighed. "Mom, can we please talk? We're talking." She looked around the kitchen I had lived in for 36 years. The yellow curtains Robert insisted were too cheerful. The old oak table where Elena had done her homework. The tiny pencil marks on the pantry door measuring her height every birthday until she turned 16. "I know this house means a lot to you." "It does, but memories aren't the house." "No," I agreed. "They're the people." She smiled hopefully, exactly the response she expected. Then I continued. "And sometimes the people become the reason you keep the house." Her smile disappeared. She reached into her purse and unfolded several glossy brochures. Independent living, luxury senior apartments, resort-style retirement, swimming pools, yoga classes, restaurant dining. Everything designed to convince older people that leaving home was freedom instead of surrender. "I already spoke with the director," Elena said. "They have an opening next month. I won't need it. You haven't even looked." "I don't have to." Her patience cracked for the first time. "Mom, you're 64. I know my age. You live alone." "Yes. What if something happens?" I couldn't help smiling. For 37 years, I was responsible for emergency plans covering more than 600 hospital beds. "I know. I coordinated helicopter evacuations." "I understand. I managed pandemics, floods, electrical failures, and one gas explosion." She fell silent. "If something happens," I said softly, "I'll recognize it." She looked away. People often mistake competence for stubbornness when competence gets in their way. Then Daniel walked through the front door without knocking. That surprised me, not because he entered, because he looked relieved to see Elena hadn't convinced me yet. He was wearing the same navy jacket he'd worn the night before. "There you are," he said. "We've been talking." He pulled out a chair. "We actually wanted to show you something." He placed a folder on my kitchen table. "A market analysis, property values, comparable home sales, professional estimates. Someone had spent money preparing it. Someone expected this conversation. Our realtor thinks we could get around $893,000 if we list before spring," Daniel explained. "It would solve everyone's problems." Everyone's. Interesting choice of words. "My problems seem to be doing just fine," I answered. His expression tightened. "You know that's not what I meant." "I know exactly what you meant." Silence settled over the room. Then Daniel asked the question that changed everything. "So, have you looked through Dad's old papers recently?" My heartbeat didn't change. Years in hospital administration had trained me never to react before understanding why someone was asking. I simply folded my hands. "No." He exchanged the quickest glance with Elena. Less than a second, but long enough. Long enough for me to know they weren't interested in my house. They were looking for something they believed was still inside it. And for the first time since Thanksgiving dinner, I realized this had never been about retirement at all. I had spent 38 years sitting across conference tables from people who believed they were better prepared than they actually were. Hospital budgets, insurance auditors, attorneys, state inspectors. They all shared one habit. The moment they thought they knew more than everyone else, they stopped paying attention. Daniel had just made the same mistake. "What papers are you talking about?" I asked. He smiled too quickly. "Oh, nothing important. People rarely say nothing important unless it is exactly the opposite." Elena interrupted before I could answer. "Dad always kept everything. Tax records, insurance, old contracts. We just thought maybe someday you'd want help organizing them." Help. There was that word again. "I've managed paperwork my entire adult life," I said. "I don't think filing cabinets are going to defeat me now." Daniel chuckled politely. Of course. But disappointment flickered across his face before he could hide it. That tiny expression stayed with me long after they left. Not because I knew what they wanted, because I knew they were looking for something specific. That afternoon, I drove downtown. Marietta hadn't changed much in 40 years. The brick storefront still overlooked the Muskingum River. The courthouse clock still ran 3 minutes fast. The same diner still served pie that was better than it had any right to be. Retirement had given me time to notice details again, something I hadn't realized I missed. Instead of going home, I parked outside the office of my longtime attorney, Claire Whitmore. We had known each other for almost 20 years. She handled several legal matters for Riverside Memorial Hospital before opening her own practice. When her receptionist saw me, she smiled. "Ruth, Claire has 15 minutes before her next client." Claire stood as I entered. "I was wondering how long it would take." I laughed softly. "You expected me?" "I expected Thanksgiving." She pointed toward the chair across from her desk. "You only schedule appointments after family holidays." She wasn't wrong. I handed her the sealed envelope. She looked at the handwriting. "Roberts." Then she looked at me. "You finally opened it last night." She carefully removed the documents. She read every page without speaking. When she finished, she leaned back and folded her hands. "So, they've started?" "I believe they have." "Do they know?" "I don't think so." Claire nodded slowly. "Good." She walked toward a locked filing cabinet and removed another folder, an exact duplicate. "I've kept this copy for 9 years. I hoped we'd never need it. So did I." For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Finally, she slid both folders across the desk. "You realize what this means?" "Yes." "They can't force a sale. I know. They can't negotiate without you. I know." "And if they already promised someone access to the property," she didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. Outside, a train horn echoed across town. I stared through the office window. Robert had always believed land was different from money. Money disappears. Land waits. "You remember why he insisted?" Claire asked. I remember. Robert had refused 3 offers over the years. Friends thought he was stubborn. Developers called him unrealistic. Even Elena used to joke that her father loved dirt more than people. The truth was simpler. He trusted time more than speculation. Claire closed the folder. I had been watching the county planning meetings. That caught my attention. "A major medical research campus is expected to be approved before Christmas." I looked up. "So it's official?" "Not publicly, but yes." She tapped one page with her finger. "And without this easement," she smiled for the first time, "their entire access road disappears." The room suddenly felt very quiet, not because of the money, because I finally understood why Daniel had asked about Robert's papers. Someone had already counted on something that wasn't theirs to promise, and if I was right, my daughter had absolutely no idea whose dream she was helping build. The phone rang. Claire glanced at the screen. "Unknown number." She answered, listened, said only 3 words. "One moment, please." Then she looked directly at me. "It's a commercial developer. He was asking for you by name." Claire never put a call on speaker without asking. This time, she didn't ask. She simply pressed the button and looked at me. "Ms. Hernandez?" a polished male voice said. "My name is Stephen Carlisle. I'm with Carlisle Development Group." I hope I'm not calling at a bad time. It depends on why you're calling. A brief laugh. I appreciate direct people. I've spent my career around emergencies. Small talk wastes time. I understand. He paused. We're assembling several adjoining parcels west of Maple Street for a medical innovation campus. We've been informed you may own a recorded easement affecting one of the access routes. May own. Interesting wording. You've been informed correctly. We'd like to discuss purchasing your interest. I wasn't aware it was for sale. Another pause. We're prepared to make a very generous offer. I'll listen. He named the figure. $346,800. Claire didn't react. Neither did I. It wasn't enough to surprise me. It was enough to tell me they were worried. I'll think about it, I said. We're hoping to move quickly. I imagine you are. When the call ended, Claire folded her hands. They're nervous. They're desperate. There's a difference. I smiled. Not for very long. On the drive home, I took the long route through Maple Street. Construction markers dotted empty fields. Survey flags fluttered in the cold November wind. Equipment hadn't arrived yet, but plans had. People spend millions only after they're convinced. Every signature is already waiting. Someone had convinced them mine was only a formality. Someone had been very confident. The answer arrived 2 days later. Not from a lawyer, not from the developer, from my neighbor, Helen. She knocked just after breakfast carrying a loaf of fresh banana bread. I almost didn't stop, she said, but I thought you'd want to know. Know what? I was at the Rotary luncheon yesterday. She hesitated. Daniel was there. I stayed quiet. He introduced himself to one of the developers. My stomach tightened. He said his mother-in-law was finally ready to downsize. I looked at her. He said the paperwork would be finished before Christmas. Helen watched my face carefully. I thought maybe, that I should know. She nodded. I'm sorry. I thanked her for telling me. After she left, I sat alone in the kitchen for almost an hour. Not because I was angry, because I was disappointed. Daniel hadn't merely assumed I would agree. He had already made promises using my name. Promises he had no authority to make. Hospitals teach another lesson most people never learn. A mistake made privately can often be corrected. A promise made publicly becomes much more dangerous. People start spending money, signing contracts, making announcements, depending on outcomes. And when reality arrives, someone must pay. That evening, Elena invited herself over again. She brought my favorite soup. She kissed my cheek. She smiled exactly as she had when she was 12 years old after breaking a lamp and hoping kindness would erase the truth. I've been thinking, she said. I have too. I know we've been pushing. Yes, but Daniel and I only want what's best. I believe you. She looked relieved. Really? I believe that's what you've convinced yourselves. Her smile faded. I reached into the cabinet beside Robert's old desk. Not for the sealed envelope. Not yet. Instead, I removed a thin blue folder. Inside were copies of every property tax payment I'd made during the last 9 years. Every insurance premium. Every maintenance invoice. Every roof repair. Every furnace inspection. Every dollar. I placed them neatly on the table. You know what's interesting, Elena? She looked down. What? You've talked about this house for 4 days. Yes. But you haven't asked me a single question. She frowned. What do you mean? You never asked if I wanted to move. Silence. You never asked whether I was lonely. She lowered her eyes. You never asked if I was sick. The room became painfully quiet. You only asked about the house. For the first time, my daughter had no answer. Then her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen. The color drained from her face. It was a message from Daniel. She read it once. Then again, finally she whispered, Mom, who is Carlisle Development? Elena looked from her phone to my face, then back to the phone again. Mom, her voice was barely above a whisper. Daniel says a developer just called him. I'm sure they did. They're asking why the access agreement hasn't been signed. I folded my hands. I imagine they're anxious. She stared at me as though she were seeing a stranger. What access agreement? The one your husband apparently promised them. Her lips parted. I don't understand. I know. She sank slowly into the chair across from me. For the first time since Thanksgiving, she wasn't trying to persuade me. She was trying to catch up. Daniel told me, she began carefully, the land behind your property had already been secured. Most of it has. And ours? It isn't ours. She frowned. What does that mean? I reached for the sealed envelope Robert had left behind. The paper had yellowed slightly around the edges. He had written only 3 words across the front. If necessary. I opened it again. Inside was a copy of an easement agreement Robert and I had negotiated almost 10 years earlier. Not a deed, not ownership. Something far more important, a permanent right-of-way that crossed a narrow strip behind our property, only 40 feet wide, easy to ignore, impossible to replace. The hospital owned this corridor decades ago, I explained. When they expanded, they no longer needed it. They offered to abandon it. Your father insisted we preserve it. Why? Because he believed someone would eventually need it again. Elena stared at the survey map. A thin red line crossed several parcels before reaching the county road. So, every truck, ambulance, employee, and visitor entering that future medical campus needs legal access. She looked up. And they can't? Not without my signature. Silence filled the kitchen. It lasted almost a minute. Then she whispered, Daniel never told me any of this. I'm beginning to suspect Daniel didn't know all of it. Her eyes narrowed. What do you mean? I think someone assumed I would simply sign. That evening, Daniel arrived. He didn't knock. He came through the front door carrying a forced smile that disappeared the moment he saw the documents spread across the table. You've been busy. I have. He looked at the survey. His face lost color. You found it? No, I remembered it. He swallowed. We should talk. We are. He pulled out a chair but didn't sit. Instead, he paced slowly across the kitchen. The developer misunderstood. No, they believed what you told them. He stopped walking. It wasn't like that. I watched him carefully. For years, I had interviewed department directors before hiring them. People reveal themselves long before they realize they're speaking. You've already accepted something. His eyes flickered. I had my answer. What was it? He remained silent. An advance? Nothing. A consulting contract? Still nothing. Then Elena spoke. Daniel? He looked at her. Finally, they paid us a reservation bonus. The room became perfectly still. How much? He hesitated. $81,400. Elena's chair scraped against the floor. You told me it was your annual performance bonus. I was going to pay it back after closing. You lied. I simplified. No. Her voice was sharper than I'd heard in years. You lied. Daniel ran a hand through his hair. I knew Ruth would eventually agree. You never asked me. I didn't think. No, I said quietly. You didn't. He turned toward me. We've already committed that money. I assumed you had. If this deal falls apart, it won't. Hope flashed across his face. Then I finished. It simply won't happen the way you expected. His shoulders dropped. For the first time, I wasn't looking at an overconfident son-in-law. I was looking at a man who had built an entire future on permission he never actually had. The silence was broken by Claire's name appearing on my phone. I answered immediately. Ruth, she said, the developer just doubled their offer. I glanced at Daniel. He was listening to every word. Claire continued. And they requested an emergency meeting. I smiled for the first time in days. I think it's time. Claire reserved a private conference room at her office for the following Tuesday. She insisted on neutral ground, not because she expected an argument, because she expected paperwork. There were 6 people at the table: Claire, me, 2 attorneys representing Carlyle Development Group, their vice president, Stephen Carlyle, and Daniel. Elena wasn't there. She had called me the night before. I can't defend what he did. I know. I also can't sit beside him while he pretends this was all a misunderstanding. I know that too. It was the first honest conversation we'd had in weeks. Stephen Carlyle stood as I entered. Mrs. Hernandez, Mr. Hernandez. Carlyle. He extended his hand. His grip was firm, professional, but his eyes betrayed exhaustion. Someone had not slept much. We appreciate you coming. I was curious. He smiled politely. I imagine you know why we're here. I have a fairly good idea. Everyone took their seats. One of the attorneys opened a presentation folder. Survey maps, engineering drawings, traffic studies, environmental reports, months of work, millions of dollars already invested. Stephen spoke carefully. The medical campus will bring nearly 900 permanent jobs to Washington County. I've read the proposal. We sincerely hope you'll become part of it. I already am. He looked confused. My late husband made sure of that. Claire slid a single document across the table. The original easement agreement. Every attorney in the room leaned forward. One of them adjusted his glasses. The other quietly exhaled. This, he murmured, was never disclosed. It was properly recorded, Claire replied. If someone failed to discover it during due diligence, that isn't Mrs. Hernandez's responsibility. Nobody argued, because she was right. Stephen turned slowly toward Daniel. You assured us all necessary rights had been secured. Daniel swallowed. We believed Ding. No, Stephen interrupted him calmly. You represented it as fact. Silence. The kind that costs money. The attorneys asked for 20 minutes to review the county records. Claire and I waited in another room. She poured coffee. Neither of us touched it. You don't look nervous, she observed. I'm not. What are you thinking? About Robert? She smiled. He'd hate all this attention. He would. I looked through the window toward the courthouse across the street. He always said people become careless when they think success is guaranteed. Claire laughed softly. He was annoyingly right. 43 minutes later they returned. Stephen looked older, not defeated, simply realistic. He placed a new contract on the table. Our previous offer no longer reflects the project's value. I assumed as much. He slid a single page toward me. Signing bonus, $412,675 annual easement royalty, $58,240 per year. Estimated lifetime value, more than $1.9 million. Daniel closed his eyes. He had expected me to accept the first offer. He had secretly spent money he didn't own. Now every number on the page reminded him how expensive his assumptions had become. Stephen folded his hands. We're prepared to proceed immediately. I have one condition. You name it. I looked first at him, then at Daniel. My condition has nothing to do with money. The room fell silent again. I want one written amendment. The attorney uncapped his pen. What amendment? No future owner of my property or my heirs may be pressured, coerced, or represented by anyone without written authorization. Stephen blinked, then nodded. Done. The attorney began writing. Daniel stared at me. That's it? No. I met his eyes for the first time that afternoon. There's one more thing. He straightened. You will repay every dollar of that $81,400. I, personally. His shoulders sagged. If you need 5 years, take 5 years. If you need to sell your truck, sell it. But you will never again build your future by volunteering mine. No one spoke, not even his attorneys, because there was nothing left to defend. When the contracts were signed, Stephen shook my hand. Mrs. Hernandez, yes? I've negotiated land acquisitions for 26 years. He smiled respectfully. I've never met anyone better prepared. I smiled back. I spent 38 years running a hospital. We prepare for complications before they happen. As Claire gathered the signed documents, my phone vibrated. A message from Elena. Can we talk tonight, alone? I looked at the screen for several seconds. Then I typed one word. Yes. Elena arrived just after sunset. For the first time in years, she came alone. No Daniel, no hurried smile, no folder tucked beneath her arm. She stood on my porch holding nothing except her car keys. When I opened the door, she looked as though she hadn't slept in days. "Can I come in?" "Of course." She walked into the kitchen and stopped beside the old oak table. "I used to do my homework here." "You did." "I carved my initials underneath." "You thought I never noticed." "You knew?" "I've always known." For the first time in weeks, we both smiled. It disappeared almost immediately. "I'm sorry." She said it so quietly I almost didn't hear it. "I know." "No." She shook her head. "You don't. I wasn't trying to take your house. I believe you. I really thought I was helping." "I believe that too." Tears gathered in her eyes. But somewhere along the way, she looked down at the floor. "I stopped seeing you as my mother. I stayed silent. I started seeing you as a problem that needed to be solved." The words hung between us. Painful. Honest. "I kept telling myself it was about your safety." She laughed bitterly. "It wasn't. No. It was about making our lives easier." Neither of us spoke for several moments. Finally, she asked, "Did you know?" "Know what?" "That Daniel accepted money." I looked into her eyes. "No, but I knew he had already promised something." She nodded slowly. "I found out the same day you did." She reached into her coat pocket and placed an envelope on the table. Inside was a cashier's check. 23,400. My savings. I frowned. "What is this?" "The first payment." "For what?" "To help repay the advance." I pushed the envelope back toward her. "No, Butsa, no. He accepted that money. I know. He'll repay it." She stared at me. "That's not your debt." Fresh tears rolled down her cheeks. "I married him." "You did." "I trusted him." "You did. But you didn't sign those papers." She covered her face with both hands. "I should have stopped him." "You didn't know." "I should have asked more questions." I reached across the table and took her hand. "So should he." A week later, Daniel asked if he could see me. Not at the house. At a small coffee shop near the river. He looked different. Not because of the clothes, because the certainty was gone. He stood as I approached. "Thank you for coming." I sat down. "You wanted to say something." He nodded. "I resigned." "From your job?" "No, from the development project." That surprised me. "They gave me a choice. I assumed they would." He looked out the window. "They're keeping the project." "But not me." I said nothing. "I spent 20 years building my reputation, and I destroyed it in 2 months." He wasn't asking for sympathy. He was stating a fact. "I owe you an apology." "You do." "I don't expect forgiveness." "I know." He swallowed. "I kept telling myself everyone would benefit." Eventually, I convinced myself that justified lying. It didn't. No. He slid a folded document across the table. A repayment agreement. Signed. Notarized. Automatic deductions from his salary at his new job. Every dollar. Every cent. No excuses. "I'll finish paying it back." "I believe you." He looked surprised. "You do?" "I do." "Why?" "Because now you're finally paying for something that belongs to you." For the first time since Thanksgiving, he understood exactly what I meant. As I stood to leave, he stopped me. "Ruth?" "Yes?" "I almost destroyed my family over a house." I looked at him calmly. "No, you almost destroyed it because you forgot people aren't assets." He lowered his head. I walked out before he could answer. Some lessons only begin after the conversation ends. Spring arrived quietly. Construction began in March. From my kitchen window, I could occasionally see trucks moving in the distance beyond the trees. The medical research campus was finally becoming real. People often asked whether I regretted making the developer pay more. I always gave them the same answer: no. Then they asked the question they actually wanted to ask: "Do you regret what happened with your daughter?" That answer was harder, because regret and forgiveness are not the same thing. 6 months after Thanksgiving, Elena invited me to dinner. Not because she needed something, not because paperwork had to be signed, simply because she wanted me there. When I arrived, she hugged me before saying a word. No audience, no performance, just my daughter. Dinner was ordinary: roasted chicken, fresh bread, too much mashed potatoes. Exactly the kind of meal our family used to share before money entered every conversation. Halfway through dessert, my granddaughter disappeared upstairs. She returned carrying a small wooden frame. "Grandma, I made something." Inside the frame was an old family photograph. Robert stood behind me with his hands resting on my shoulders. Elena was 16. Her smile was missing 2 front teeth. Across the bottom, my granddaughter had written in careful handwriting, "Home is where nobody decides your future for you." I looked at Elena. Her eyes filled with tears. "I'm sorry she heard everything." I smiled gently. I'm grateful she did. Children don't learn from the stories adults tell. They learn from the mistakes adults survive. Daniel kept his word. Every month, a payment arrived exactly when promised, sometimes early, never late. 2 years later, the final balance was paid in full. Along with the last payment came a handwritten note. Not typed, not written by an attorney, just 4 short sentences. I spent months believing I had lost money. What I had really lost was my integrity. Thank you for making me earn it back. 8. Daniel. I folded the letter and placed it inside Robert's old desk, right beside the sealed envelope that had changed everything. The easement agreement funded more than anyone expected. The annual royalties easily covered my retirement. I renovated the house without borrowing a dollar. I replaced the roof Robert had postponed fixing, installed wider doorways, not because anyone forced me to, but because one day I might actually need them. Choice feels very different when it belongs to you. I also created something no one in my family knew about until much later: the Ruth Hernandez Community Nursing Scholarship. Every year, students from Washington County who couldn't afford nursing school received help. Robert always believed hospitals saved communities. Now, in a small way, he still did. One afternoon, nearly 3 years after Thanksgiving, Elena and I sat together on the back porch. Construction across the valley was finished. The research campus buzzed with life. Ambulances arrived. Scientists hurried between buildings. Young nurses laughed during lunch breaks. The access road crossing that narrow strip of land carried hundreds of cars every day. Robert had been right. Time had done what no argument ever could. Elena broke the silence. "Can I ask you something?" "Always." "Were you ever planning to punish us?" I looked toward the hills before answering. "No." "Never?" "I wasn't interested in punishment." "What were you interested in?" "The truth." She waited. "If people only treat you with respect after discovering your value, they never respected you." She nodded slowly. "I understand that now. I know. When people hear my story, they usually think it's about hidden documents, or real estate, or money. It isn't. Money simply revealed what was already there. The real lesson came much earlier. The moment my daughter announced my future without asking whether I wanted it. Growing older doesn't make your voice less valuable. Retirement doesn't transfer ownership of your life to your children. Love is not measured by how efficiently someone manages your future. It's measured by whether they remember it still belongs to you. If this story reminded you that dignity has no expiration date, then it was worth telling. And if someone in your life still treats you like the author of your own future, hold on to them. They're worth more than any piece of land.